Time to take a look at your money. Well, whether you like them or not, self-checkout kiosks are a growing trend of the retail industry. According to data from Capital One Spending and ECR, 96% of all grocery stores now offer customers a self-checkout option. An estimated 77% of non-grocery retail stores also offer some form of self-checkout option. But why is the retail industry moving away from traditional cashiers, and how exactly do Americans feel about this changing dynamic? Financial expert Mark Revicheski is joining us now on Zoom to break down all the numbers and the answers to those questions. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, morning, Jenna. Good to see you again. First, I want to wish you, Andrew, and certainly all our viewers a very happy July 4th holiday. As you can see, I'm in Chicago this week, so I'm ready to brace myself for that annual mix of fireworks and gunfire.
Well, we hope you enjoy it. Okay, so starting off, why are we seeing this continued shift towards self-checkout in the retail industry?
You're right. The self-checkout model isn't a new concept, but its adoption by the retail industry has really exploded over the past 3 to 4 years. Since 2021, Jenna, the self-checkout market has grown by 65%. By 2030, that market is expected to increase by another 125%. The main reason the retail industry has kind of embraced the self-checkout model, so to speak, to the extent that it has, is to reduce labor costs. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. But most states have enacted their own minimum wage laws that vastly exceed that. Some states are as high as, $14, $15 an hour. California recently raised its minimum wage for much of its fast food industry to $20 an hour. But it also helped retailers address that labor shortage that we saw, as we came out of the global pandemic. But now retailers are keeping those self-checkout kiosks to help keep their costs down.
Yeah, well, in a recent report by the Wall Street Journal cited that some retailers like Target and Walmart are starting to actually scale back on some of their self-checkout options. Do you think this will affect how retailers ultimately use self-checkout?
There have been reports, as you just pointed out, that some retailers are kind of scaling back a little bit on their use of self-checkout. For example, limiting the number of items at self-checkout to 10 or 12, or even scaling back or eliminating self-checkout in certain stores. The biggest drawback that retailers have with the self-checkout model is theft. Theft increases by 65% at self-checkout kiosks. 15% of consumers say they have intentionally used those self-checkout kiosks to steal. 44% of those individuals admit they plan to steal again. The average value of items stolen for each theft is around $60. But then, Jenna, there's accidental theft. 21% of self-checkout thefts are deemed accidental, where the shopper simply fails to notice when an item doesn't scan. So I think any reduction in those self-checkout models is more specific to certain stores to address that risk of theft.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that's kind of hard to regulate, what people are
Yes.
putting into their carts and stuff. Okay, do Americans generally like the self-checkout option, or do you think they prefer using the traditional store cashier?
Well, Jenna, the results might surprise you. They certainly surprise me. According to a nationwide survey by Capital One Shopping, 73% of Americans say they actually prefer the self-checkout model over using the store cashier. And the data suggests that usage of self-checkout will only increase in the future. The main reason for that preference, Jenna, is speed. 85% of consumers say that self-checkout is faster than a traditional cashier. But that preference is heavily influenced by age. The older you are, the less likely you are to prefer self-checkout. For example, 84% of Gen Z shoppers. Now, those are the ones who are born between, 1997, 2012, prefer self-checkout, but that preference drops to just 46% for baby boomers.
Well, I'll admit I'm one of the people who, if I don't have a lot of things in my cart, I do use self-checkout because I do think it's faster. And I like using my big bags, and I put a lot more things in my bags than I feel like typical cashiers do.
I understand completely. I'm a little bit more of the opposite. I kind of still prefer that cashier, the traditional cash register, but each to his own, I guess they say.
Well, there's our different generations talking, I guess. A great example of what you were saying.
Exactly.
Mark, thanks
Couldn't
for
have
joining us.
worded it better.
Yes. We will see you next week.
In this